Hi folks, welcome to today's webinar. My name's Paul Doyle. I'm the General Manager, Rail Freight and Ports with Australasian Railway Association. It's my pleasure to introduce you today to Nat Nagy. He's the Executive Director, Transport Safety at the Australian Transport Safety Bureau. Nat's been involved in the transport industry since 1996 in a diverse range of operational safety management and executive leadership roles. He joined ATSB in 2017 and he leads the operational division of the organisation across the rail, aviation, marine domains, and has a core focus on improvement of transport strategy across all industries. Today's presentation will outline the current legislated role of ATSB in the rail industry, its current focus, and its future direction. Before we get into that, I'll just run through a few housekeeping rules like we normally do. So just a reminder that this presentation is live. You can ask a question. You just need to click on the dark blue hand and a little pop-up screen will appear, so you can put your question in there. I encourage you to send through as many questions as you can. We'll have time for some question and answers at the back end of the presentation. You can also download the resources using the blue drop-down, light blue drop-down button as well. That will give you a PDF. All of this information will be available on our website later on as well. And just a reminder too that you hover over your little double arrows or your square box to change the screen position as well. So if you have any technical problems, then there's a number that you can call, which is on the screen right now, to get hold of Redback. But otherwise, let's get into it. So I will, without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Nat. The virtual floor is all of yours.
Great, thanks, Paul, and thanks everyone for joining us today. By the looks of it, we've got a good number of participants online. I'd love to be able to see your faces. It's sort of a brand new thing for me, this world, and it's probably been a good 6 or 8 months since I've been able to stand in front of many of you. Great to see a number of names there that I've spent a lot of time with over the last couple of years, and quite a few new names there to me as well. I dare say probably if I saw your faces, I'd recognise you. So I hope very soon that we'll be able to see each other in person soon. I firstly like to thank Paul, Carolyn and the team at ARA. It's been great to be able to have these webinars, and I've been dialing into them as well as a number of other organisations that have been having them. It's been great to be able to stay connected in one form or another throughout this period, because it has been very difficult, obviously, to stay connected and to change the way we work. Here at the ATSB, we've been able to continue our business, albeit in a different way. In a lot of ways, we've actually been able to increase our productivity, because a lot of the noise and day-to-day hasn't been occurring, and we've been fortunate in that we're a fairly mobile workforce anyway, so we've been able to basically transition to home-based work and continue our day-to-day, albeit with kids screaming in the background and animals jumping in front of the screen when we're having meetings and that sort of thing, which I'm sure many of you have experienced also. I've decided to come in here to the office today instead of sitting in front of the thing at home. Normally where I'm standing now is sort of the hub of where we'd have press conferences and 50 people in the room, and I'm standing all on my lonesome in here. So it's kind of feeling kind of odd, but kind of good at the same time to be standing up with a podium and almost normality. So I'll kick into the core of the presentation today. There's a fair bit of info that I'm going to kind of spray out right now, some of which for a lot of you will be your bread and butter. You know about it, you've heard it before, but I'm hoping that there'll be little nuggets of information in there that are of use to you to understand a little bit more about us, certainly where we've been, and probably more so where we're going, where the ATSB wants to be in the future, and also what our view of where we're supposed to be in the future. And that comes from a range of sources, whether it's from government in the first instance, but also from the industry more broadly, and what we've heard and what I've heard over the last couple of years of being in the industry. Firstly, I'll go over a little bit about who we are, how we exist, why we exist, and then just delve into a whole range of those. Please put your questions out there. I know the team will be corralling those as they go and making sure that we've got them. We'll likely answer those at the end, but please, as it goes through, put them in there, and if there's just a little bit of context around what part of the presentation, if there's something specific that you want me to expand on, I'm more than happy to do that at the end. We should have time for that. So who is the Australian Transport Safety Bureau? Well, we're the National Independent No Blame Transport Safety Investigation Agency, and that term no blame is something that I'm going to delve into a little bit more in a second. Our aim, and this comes from our legislation, it's to improve the safety of and public confidence in aviation, rail and marine transport, and that's through the independent investigation of transport accidents. That's what the role a lot of you would see us out there doing, but it's also a couple of other things. It's safety data recording, analysis and research, and also fostering safety awareness, knowledge and action. So that's basically our safety promotions and communications type area. How we're arranged is that we're established under the Transport Safety Investigation Act. We're an independent Commonwealth government statutory agency. It's a little bit of a mouthful. What that basically means is that we're established under legislation, and under that legislation, we are independent of other policymakers, industry, regulators, anyone around. And whilst we report to the Parliament through the Minister, we basically are free to go about our operational duties without influence from them. So whilst the government may direct us to do an investigation, it can't direct how we do that investigation. The other key part of our governance model is that we've got an independent commission. So we're made up of a chief commissioner who's also the chief executive officer. So basically it has the power around the executive operation of the organisation. There's also 3 commissioners, and they come from the 3 modes that we investigate. So we've got a rail commissioner, being Carolyn Walsh, which many of you would know very well from her decades in the industry. We've got an aviation commissioner, that's Chris Manning, who is the former chief pilot of Qantas, so a significant amount of experience in that domain. And also we've got a fairly recently joined marine commissioner, Gary Prosser, who was formerly with the regulator, AMSA, as the deputy CEO, but also a long career in the maritime industry. So that provides a bit of an overview of how we're structured and set up. I'll delve a little bit more into our makeup of our investigator teams and that sort of thing shortly. But that commission is a fundamental way of how we operate, how we ensure that we are operating within those industries the way we should be. Now, in terms of rail safety in Australia and how we fit into that, and this is where I'll delve into a little bit of that no blame or no fault investigation concept. Quite often our role, and not only in Australia, but internationally, similar organisations, there is often confusion as to our linkage or otherwise with the regulator. We're not the regulator, and we don't have a part to play in the core regulation of the industries that we operate in. However, we obviously do communicate and work alongside the regulator to have a complete system of safety within the industry. So in this case, in rail, obviously, you'd all be very well aware of the National Rail Safety Regulator's role. And their investigations are more focused around compliance or prosecution purposes, also to improve safety, obviously, and they're a fundamental input to a system of safety. Our role as the independent no-fault investigator is to investigate an incident or a group of incidents or any other transport safety matter to improve safety and public confidence. So it's a much broader and if you like, systemic remit, and has a couple of useful examples over the last few decades to explain it. And particularly in the rail industry, you'd be aware of these two. So Glenbrook in 99 and Waterfall in 2003, two significant events that occurred. Obviously, both with significant fatalities and industry and injuries throughout. And in both accidents, a special commission of inquiry was held, and that was to great expense to the taxpayer to enable that. Many millions of dollars are spent on these sort of inquiries, and they're stood up often from a high consequence event. Now, Justice Peter McInerney presided over these, and he made a number of findings or comments in respect to the rationale for having an independent investigator, such as the ATSB. Now, I'll just go a couple of those findings. So this one here, the systemic safety investigation of accidents and incidents is a necessary part of a thorough safety management system. It enables an organisation to learn from incident investigations and thereby enhance its safety performance. So that's the first comment. It kind of speaks for itself. That was out of Waterfall. It basically to look at the systemic level, not just the what happened, but the why it happened on multiple levels. So not just looking at why a driver may have either missed a signal or gone to a certain place at a certain time at a certain speed, but what led to that? What systems were in place? What training was in place? What controls were in place within the organisation? What sort of regulations or standards were in place? What sort of policies were in place at a whole of government level to potentially impact the outcome of that? The next one here is an important one for part of this, is a permanent independent investigative body such as the ATSB can conduct investigations much more efficiently than a special commission of inquiry. It avoids the conflict of interest identified in the current legislative model, where the investigator is part of the regulator is the key context there. So ensuring that there is an independent body that can investigate, but also one that has the ongoing skills to be able to stand up. So obviously a special commission of inquiry, or for that matter, a coronial inquest, basically drags in expertise on a once-off basis. Huge cost, huge amount of time to be able to stand that sort of capability up. The next one, and there's just a couple more of these, is the functions of a no-blame investigator are intrinsically different to those of a safety regulator. The no-blame investigator necessarily has its primary object the examination of accidents and incidents from a purely objective perspective to determine what has occurred, why it's occurred, and what needs to be done to rectify any deficiencies identified by the investigation. Now, a lot of this is, it's talking about the difference between blame and no blame. Blame is, by its construct, something that looks backwards, looking at really what happened and why that happened there, as opposed to what we want to look at is beyond just the crew, the rail vehicle, the rail infrastructure in an occurrence, and look at where there might be significant risk factors and ongoing risk factors, either in an operator, in a regulator, in the standards or regulations that have influenced the actions of that crew or serviceability of the rail vehicle or rail infrastructure involved. So looking more at a broader aspect of what are the significant and ongoing risks that may exist in a system. The other piece here is that, again, that no interest in determining blame, and looking more at the role of any organisation in that. So, sometimes some of these comments can be confused around just looking at the regulator or the policy or oversight. More and more, as we're in a mature rail system in Australia, the operator and the organisation involved does have, really, there's a societal expectation that the organisation does look at how its role may have contributed to the accident. So the importance of looking at how that happens, and then the safety regulators monitoring of that. But really, the organisation has an increasing role in how it can influence the outcome. So it's certainly something we look at, and more so something that you as individual organisations are looking at more and more. So now just a little bit about our organisation, how we're structured, how we go about our business. We've got about 100 employees across 6 locations, so from Brisbane, Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth. Around 60 dedicated transport safety investigators across all the modes. We also have, outside of that, standard corporate type supporting functions. We've got communications specialists and also our safety reporting area, which is where a lot of our reports, our data and that sort of thing is processed. We're multimodal. Now this term's caused a little bit of confusion over the last couple of years. What do we mean by multimodal? Well, obviously we investigate a number of modes, but more so what's the real intent of what that gets? What it really does is it gives us diversity. So by having a range of different backgrounds input into an investigation, it doesn't mean that we don't have technical expertise around the specific mode or event that happens. Sometimes we don't actually have that specialty expertise in-house, so we'll get subject matter expertise in. But amongst our investigator workforce, first and foremost, we focus on the ability to understand our methodology, how to analyse particular events and look at those larger risk factors from an organisational, regulatory, safety management system and policy point of view. The range of backgrounds you can see on this slide, from pilots, train drivers, merchant mariners. We've got flight data recovery analysts, quantitative specialists, material failure engineers, aeronautical engineers, civil engineers. We've got human factors research, psychology, data specialists, media and communication professionals. So a diverse range of expertise. And really what that allows us to do is look at things from different perspectives. When you're sitting in an industry, in an operation, in an organisation, and you're talking about people that know that organisation intimately, it's very easy to get, you would have heard the term groupthink, to get down a certain path without looking at different lenses and different perspectives on an issue. What we try to do by bringing all of these different types of specialists and backgrounds into the discussion is using our methodology, being evidence and objectively using evidence and objectively looking at a set of circumstances, looking at different lenses through that to get the outcome, to look at where our lines of inquiry are, to hopefully uncover something that's different. Something that's broader that you might not be able to do if you've got a particular lens of that operation exclusively. As I mentioned before, our commission also has various specialties and backgrounds, and that also helps us make sure that we are being objective, but we're also being relevant in terms of the industry and the whole of industry and national approach. Now, I mentioned before, in terms of our commissioners having different backgrounds, it's a fundamental part of how we, if you like, provide assurance that we are relevant within the investigations we're doing. And in fact, a number of years ago now, it was an investigation, a finding out of a Senate inquiry into aviation safety regulation, the importance of having at the very top of the organisation in that governance structure, that understanding and link to industry. Most of you would know Carolyn and have come across Carolyn over the last many decades actually, and she's been a fundamental part of making sure that we do evolve how we're operating to remain relevant, to make sure that we push towards timely outcomes and that we're doing things now to make sure that we are going to timely investigations, because something that happened 5 years ago, if we're only coming around to having findings now, often people have moved on, organisations have moved on, structures have completely changed in that time, so the relevance starts to diminish. So we're really focusing a lot now on how do we make sure that what comes out is in a timely manner. If it's going to be something drawn out and a number of years because of the systemic nature of it, to make sure that we look at how we make sure that the information comes out sooner. So as soon as we have that information, do a preliminary report or an interim report. And you'll start to see a lot more of that as we go forward. A lot less of the pure technical level of the investigation. Get that out, fairly soon after the occurrence, as a lot of you do in, that first 30 days. You've kind of got a lot of that core technical information. But our key value add, if you like, is when we move beyond that, when we move to the organisational risk factors, to the regulatory risk factors, to the standards, policy and procedure risk factors. How do we move to those? Through a lot of meticulous and thorough working to look through all of those angles. And that takes time, but making sure that we update you on the ways is going to be a key thing that you see more and more of. In terms of our structure as a whole, formally on 30th of June 2017, we became the single national rail safety investigator for all states and territories. On the face of it, that seems very straightforward and simple, but unfortunately, there's a lot of complexity still in what that actually means. As those of you that have been involved in the industry for some time, you know where we've come from in terms of the state-based systems, the complexities and the realities that go with that over more than just decades. There wasn't a national-wide consolidated approach to independent safety investigation. And that goes because of the nature of where the industry came from. With that, ATSB becoming the single national rail safety investigator out of the COAG reforms, the regulatory reforms of best part of a decade ago now, there are a number of funding arrangements and arrangements with the states that came about. Now, we are federally funded for incidents on the intrastate rail network, so the former DERN. For some of the other states, though, and for investigations within states, there's varying levels of resourcing and funding that happen. Now, we've got what's called a collaboration agreement with New South Wales and Victoria. That's with the Office of Transport Safety Investigation in New South Wales, the Chief Investigator Transport Safety in Victoria, for rail investigations in those states. So broadly, they conduct the investigations in those states under the TSI Act. So under delegation from the Chief Commissioner, they go about the business and basically manage that investigation whilst using our legislation, broadly using our policies, procedures and systems. So it should look, sound and smell like an ATSB investigation, but it's been conducted by them. We also work together as part of that collaboration more and more, and I'll talk in a little while about the XPT occurrence, where we are working together in collaboration to do that investigation. But the management, the day-to-day, will be done by those organisations. Now, in the other states, we have separate funding agreements with each state. So that provides more complexity again. Some of them pay up front. And what that means is that on a yearly basis, we have funding to be able to station people in those states, in those jurisdictions, to be ready to go to investigate. In the other ones, we basically have to draw on our other resource that we already have to conduct any investigation, and we basically recover that cost. So that provides a lot of challenges for us in terms of having resource available to investigate if anything happens. It means that we can't attend every event. As much as we'd like to be able to gather that information in person, we just physically can't. We'd never get an investigation out if we try to do that. And so it's always a bit of a balance and a juggling act. Now, in relation to some of those changes, the Productivity Commission, as most of you would be aware, has been going through a process to review the regulatory reforms around all of these areas. And there's a public draft report, and recommendations are now pending in a final report. I understand it's been tabled or given to government. There's 25 sitting days that they have to present that within, I understand. And so that should be coming up soon, that'll be final. Obviously, that doesn't mean that anything out of that will be automatically implemented. Then it's a decision for government as to whether they direct us to do anything. We're not a policy agency. We don't necessarily have control over exactly where we go in terms of our legislation and what we do or how we're funded. But we can certainly give information and inform government on what may or may not work and what it would cost to do things. But basically, the key piece out of the draft report, from my point of view, is that it found the ATSB's ability to investigate rail incidents and to contribute to better safety policy would be improved with appropriate resourcing. So what that means from a policy perspective, we're yet to see. Whether it's in the final report also, we're yet to see. But that will be an interesting thing to watch for all of us to see how that evolves. And particularly in the current environment, how government policy goes towards that will be a critical piece. The other key piece out of that was heavy vehicles and autonomous vehicles, that there may be a role for us in that in the future. Again, we'll wait and see and be ready to deliver as per the government's wish. So an extension of what we're talking about around resourcing and what we can actually investigate. Ideal world, we'd have resource to investigate everything. That world, would never exist, and it wouldn't be a good use of public funds either to investigate everything. But what we do try and do and prioritise is to look at those things that have the potential to deliver the greatest public benefit. Now those words come from the minister's statement of expectations of how we prioritise our resource. And those investigations, from our view, from our interpretation of that, is those that detect and alert to the presence of systemic transport safety issues. So that's the big ticket stuff, the large items that actually will have a large whole of system, whole of industry impact. To define and communicate transport safety factors, issues and safety actions to owners, operators and other industry players. And the key piece there, back to what I said earlier, they do not apportion blame or liability. That's actually part of our act. It's a requirement that we don't do that. So often people will come and say, oh, it's obvious that, old mate did this. It's so clear that that's what he did. What we seek to do is actually look beyond that. Why did he do that? And then we ask why a number of times, in effect. Why did that? Why did the system, or how did the system influence that? Are there risks sitting there still latent within the system that may cause another person to do exactly the same thing? So move beyond the individual, look more broadly at how we can improve and reduce the risk of that happening again. A couple of slides here, sort of getting into just a little bit more detail. So I'll move through them fairly quickly, but please put your questions up there as I go, and we'll answer them as we can at the end. If there's carryovers from that we can't get to everything, I'll try and endeavour to get those and get answers out to you more broadly afterwards also. So in terms of the aim of investigations, first we do determine the what. And that's what we all do, right? So as an operator, your investigators will also go out and look at what happened, walk the track and try and understand the specific technical aspects of what happened. We certainly do that. But then our broader value, if you like, or expertise is around determining why it happened. How do we identify what are the ongoing and significant safety risks that could be applied across the industry that could be reduced? How can we influence the reduction of those risks across? How can we make sure that everyone's aware of that sort of risk and how it may apply to them? And a big part is around that securing safety action. So a really important part of what we do is how do we get that safety action? We're not after just going out and shaming people. It's certainly not what our role is. Our role is to influence that improvement. And we're certainly keen to have that improvement happen before we publish an investigation, but then to make sure we communicate that appropriately also. Already touched on the Transport Safety Investigation Act, and how it relates to our day-to-day. Significant powers within that act, and that's around the gathering of information. But what goes with that power is the importance of protecting that information. So, a number of you have probably received a Section 32 notice from the ATSB in the past. What goes with that is a personal responsibility and accountability to ensure that information is not released for any other purpose other than the investigation. And it can't be used. So under legislation, it can't be used for other things directly. It can't be used for criminal purposes. It can't be used for administrative or civil action. And that's a really important piece in how things operate. Obviously, the report, once it's public, may be used as a lead, but it's certainly not able to be used in any court for any of those other purposes. So we've got a number of investigation levels, and if you like, these are the products that we produce. In the rail industry, you wouldn't have seen too many short investigations. Most of them have been in the defined or systemic level, but certainly one thing we're looking at in the future is how do we put out more short investigations that are focused more on the what, with perhaps a small or a lower level of analysis around it, but getting that information flowing and then saving our resource, if you like, to go, well, where can we actually make the difference? Where's our unique ability to influence or provide input that you can't as an industry add yourself? That's where we're wanting to move to, not just duplicating basically what you've done. How do we add value to that, which adds value to industry, to individual operators and regulators, policymakers as a whole? Again, I probably am guilty of starting to sound like a broken record in some of these things, but we're not compliance focused. Safety doesn't necessarily equal compliance, and compliance doesn't necessarily equal safety. Most of the time it does, but it's certainly just one input into an overall safety system. One of our roles is to challenge processes, regulations, standards, policies. Sometimes when I say this, it gets interpreted as, you have to go after the regulator. That's certainly not the case. What we're talking about here is more broadly, what are all the things that go into influencing how an individual operates, how within the system, how the service ability of a rail vehicle or rail infrastructure is within the overall system. So it's looking at all the processes, whether it's at the organisational level, the regulator, the RESB, for instance, could be part of that, the whole of industry, how standards are created, through to government policy and standardisation issues between areas, which we know is a fundamental part of how the rail industry is developed. With a lack of standardisation, it is an area that is well and truly within our remit. And back to that objective, whole of industry safety improvement. Not about individual events per se, and whilst that will be the catalyst for looking at something, we're after whole of industry benefits and something that will influence the whole of industry. So in terms of our findings, and this is an area that I'd encourage you to have a look at our website, because we've got some pretty good descriptors of just what exactly this means. And when you read one of our reports, it's worth just having a bit of a refresher around some of this to see what we mean by each of these terms. So safety factors are events and conditions that increase risk. Then we have what are called safety issues. So this is moving more into that systemic discussion. So they're the safety factors that have an ongoing risk and a significant risk. So there, when we're talking about risk controls, organisational issues, significant safety risks. So by definition, it's not talking about individual actions or the environmental conditions of the day. We're talking about from an organisational or whole system level. And then we also have contributing factors versus other factors that increase risk. Now, contributing factors, there's various terms that these can kind of correlate to in any number of investigation systems. And, cause is something that's used. We don't use the term cause because we look at a range of factors that contribute to an occurrence as part of our methodology. But contributing, by the nature of the word contributing, is something that does actually contribute to it. So if you were to take it away, it would reduce the chance of that happening again. Other factors that increase risk, the things that we consider are actually significant, but they don't meet the test for contributing. So it's either the significance or the consequence wasn't clear as a result of that, but it's something that's significant we've identified that we believe is worth communicating to industry. That often causes confusion in our reports. If you see, that's got nothing to do with that event, what we're merely trying to do in that is communicate that actually we've seen something here that does increase risk in the system as a whole, and we think it's worth communicating that out. In terms of action, ultimately what we want to do in our reports is not just give a lecture on something. Ultimately what we want to do is influence an improvement in the system as a whole. So our expectation and what we try to do is get safety action for anything that we deem to be a safety issue. And our preference is to do that throughout the course of the investigation. So to communicate with you and discuss with you on an ongoing basis throughout the investigation what we're seeing, what we're finding, and for you to then say, actually, yeah, that's a really good point. We're already doing something about that. Or to say, actually, we really hadn't looked at it that way. Thank you for that. We're going to take that on board. We're going to do something about that. Our preference would to be have that happening before we publish our report, so that we can put in that report, this is what the organisation, this is what the system has done about this particular issue. So the onus is on us to make sure that we communicate throughout the conduct of our investigation with you, and hopefully have an open line between us around where we're going with it. It's certainly not to catch you out. It's more we want to make sure that whatever we do helps you to add value in your operation. On the whole, my experience and most of my interactions are with senior executive throughout organisations in the industry, is that you do see us as free input in effect. And I'd really like to see more of that sort of viewpoint, and hopefully we can start to create some of that a bit more as well, that we're actually here not to catch anyone out. We're here to help you improve. Yeah, the safety of your operation is the key piece, but in my experience in other operations is that safety does equal good commercial outcomes as well. So it improves reliability. It does improve profitability because you don't have disruption. So to be able to have all of these pieces together, we can be a fundamental assistance to you improving all areas of your business as a result of that. In terms of our reporting arrangements, so up until a year ago, the ATSB was taking all Cat-A rail occurrences, and so you're reporting through us. In discussions with a lot of you that are actually on this webinar right now, as well as the regulator, we came to the conclusion that it was more relevant to have a single point of reporting. And so as of a year ago, the regulator now takes all reports, and under our legislation, they do it on our behalf, which means that when you report to them, you meet any Transport Safety Investigation Act requirements in terms of reporting to us. They immediately on-report to those to us under a letter of agreement, and there's a lot of those that flow through. You're still welcome to call us as well. However, by calling the regulator, you are meeting your obligations under the Act. In terms of reporting, there's another very important part of a mature safety system across any industry. And that's to have a voluntary and confidential reporting scheme. Now, that is within the ATSB. It operates under legislation and is also very strongly protected about how we go about that. A key tenet, if you like, of that is that we protect the identity of the individual making the report. So what we will do with that report isn't to launch a TSI Act investigation. What we'll do is we'll try and follow it up with wherever the concern may be in a way that doesn't identify the individual as best we can. And hopefully it serves as an alert to you as organisations that actually there is something here we could delve into. Hopefully your own systems pick it up, but sometimes for whatever reason, and they can be from a range of causes, people don't want to report or raise it through a management stream for whatever reason. Hopefully us raising that can then lead to you taking that on board and improving the system as a result. Occasionally it does lead to us saying, actually, was this a transport safety matter that wasn't reported? And then it may launch an investigation. But most of the time it leads to the organisation finding a way to actually resolve that concern and improve the system as a result. So you can see there, go to our website. It explains in depth some of those pieces, so that at atsb.gov.au, log onto there and have a look at what it is. You can also call the hotline, speak to someone directly if you're not sure. That can come from anyone across industry and anywhere. Like I said, the key there isn't to launch investigations into it. It's to raise potential issues to get resolved rather than go anywhere else with it. In terms of what we've got at the moment, this is actually going down day by day. This is all investigations under the TSI Act. So it's also what's in SITS investigations. We're pushing, we'll be below 100 within ATSB. It wasn't that long ago when I came on board, we were between 160 and 180. So we're actually at a much more sustainable level of investigations now to be able to do things in a timely manner. 31 rail, 80 aviation, 6 marine. That's about the percentage split that we generally have in terms of our investigative resource, so in terms of investigators numbers, as well as just our capacity to be able to operate in those industries. Going to go through, I've had a couple of requests from people just to talk about active investigations across the modes. I've had a lot of requests to talk aviation incidents, but I'm not going to talk too many of them today. Perhaps another day we can talk more about these. But I've just picked, probably from this year in recent times, our higher profile ones. So this one, the aviation collision with terrain down in the Snowy Mountains. Basically, this here was a Hercules, so an ex-military 4-engined large aircraft tanker, was tasked to go and assist with the fires down the Snowy Mountains. During a drop, collided with terrain. 3 American flight crew were killed in that occurrence, as you see there. Complete devastating scene. This is the sort of stuff that our investigators do need to deal with, regardless of the mode they're from. From all modes, they'll often attend these sort of events. Hugely complex site, a lot of time on site, and really it's just a long and sort of meticulous process now of piecing together everything that went on. So taking what we can from the site, the circumstances around it, so working out the what, and then we'll move on to the why in this one. The next one around the marine, so a very recent one, about a month ago, a Singaporean flagship, the APL England, encountered heavy weather just to the southeast of Sydney, and the vessel's main engine tripped, had a loss of propulsion for a short time, and during that there was heavy rolling in the vessel up to 25 degrees, and about 50 containers fell on the deck and into the sea. So there's potentially going to be a lot of other issues that come out of that around lashings and securing of cargo, which are probably also relevant across the industries as well. So there's definitely learnings that we can glean from all these events. Now, the main thing that I have been asked to talk briefly about is this one here. So I'd be very surprised if any of you weren't aware of this event. So back in February, the XPT New Wallen, obviously a very significant event in terms of consequence. Unfortunately, there were fatalities and a number of injuries as a result of this. And now this investigation is obviously ongoing. So in terms of the detail that I can give you, I can really only talk to those things that have been made public. But there is going to be an interim report released in a couple of months' time from now, so August, September, probably closer to September at this stage, with a number of other factual pieces that we'll be able to share with you. But for those of you that haven't read the preliminary report, that was released in April, I'd encourage you to get onto our website and have a look at it. We try to put as much information in there as possible. There's often a lot of speculation in these events, and part of what we do make sure is that we really focus on putting an evidence-based lens over things and being completely objective, regardless of whatever politics might be involved, whatever personal opinion or otherwise might be involved, and try and just focus on the facts. So we've put a fair bit out in this one of what we could actually confirm. Now, the way we're operating in this investigation is looking at how we operate together. So it's going to be led, and it is led by SITS in Victoria and supported by the ATSB and OTSI. So it's under the TSI Act. It'll be approved by the ATSB Commission, but it's a collaborative investigation between all of the players. And that is actually really helpful in this case because there are multiple jurisdictions involved and multiple stakeholder groups that are more aligned to the individuals and also the expertise we have in-house. Like I said, the prelim report was released in April. The confirmation we're able to provide in that is that it entered a passing loop at more than 100 kilometres an hour. The speed limit for there was 15 kilometres an hour. The points at either end of the loop had been changed from the normal position to the reverse position. And a train notice reflected the change and also specified the 15 kilometre an hour speed limit. The data logger showed an emergency brake application a short distance from the point, so just prior to entering the loop. And it slowed the train a small amount, but unfortunately wasn't enough to be able to negotiate the turnout at the speed. So all vehicles except the rear power car derailed, and that the consequence we all are very well aware of now. Now there was an alternative safe working system in place at the time, and we're looking closely at that. And there's a qualified worker assisting as part of that alternative safe working system. So we're looking at the operation around that and what controls are in place to limit the risk around that. Obviously, the operation of the train itself, the conditions of the track and rolling stock, and a key area around crew and passenger survivability. So one thing that we generally look at is should this have been survivable? A really important part also of what we do, which, hopefully out of this, we're able to get improvement to reduce the risk of something like this happening again. Like I said, an interim report anticipated for release shortly, which will have additional information. A number of those areas firmed up even more so in terms of specifics, and a number of other areas that we're able to bring into the investigation. So hopefully we'll be in a position to if we've got more of these, to be able to brief more broadly to industry in the next couple of months. Real important one, this one. So just a couple more slides, and then hopefully I think there's been a few questions flowing, so we can kick into those, Paul. We're looking now how we can shift our focus more into the systemic. So safety studies is an area that at our commission meeting just last week we had a discussion around how we can move into the broader systemic area, how we can move into research that actually adds even more value given the experience we have in-house. Safety studies aren't something that come from a single occurrence. They're looking at groups of occurrences or data that shows a trend in a particular area. Safe work on track has been something that's been bandied around as likely to be an early priority, but we're just finalising how we'll go about that now. But one thing that we will be doing and we'll be asking your help with is to identify where do you think the big ticket systemic whole of industry, whole of nation type issues might be. So we'll be looking at how we do a bit of a survey around that or a mechanism for you to feed that into. So we're really interested to see, well, what do you at the front line think is of value from a broader systemic safety point of view? And like I've been saying a lot, how can we bring our expertise most effectively to the industry? It is this area, in my view, where we can increase and improve safety. A lot of the technical elements, you guys have that in your organisations. You're the ones that are current with the day-to-day running of operations, with the technical elements and serviceability of infrastructure and vehicles. That's not where our expertise lies. We've certainly got some great background and expertise in that, but more broadly, we've got a whole range of other things we can add to. And sort of the final slide here is looking at, our 2030 goals. We've gone about a process the last number of years at looking, well, where is our position in the industries in the future, in all the modes, and in fact, overseas in Scandinavian countries and a number of other jurisdictions, the role of the independent safety investigator stretches across the medical industries, obviously gas and oil, whole range of other areas. How can we apply this sort of methodology to bring the greatest public benefit, in effect? Wasn't that long ago, our statement of expectations focused on passenger carrying operations, but that's shifted now to the public benefit. So that means that freight operations are well and truly relevant for us to be looking, how can we get systemic improvement? So a number of areas there. I'm not going to go into them other than to say we're looking at the future and probably the key things there. How do we become the trusted source, if you like, of finding those systemic issues, those whole of industry issues? How do we get our product mix right in terms of short investigations, to be on site, to still be having boots on the ground to understand what happened in an event, but more importantly, how do we then add the value that you can't as an organisation yourself? So that's where we want to go. We want to be key. We want to be front and centre of that. And most importantly, we want to be able to work with you to be able to achieve that. So really looking forward to the ATSB engaging more and more with the rail industry. I've been out there a lot in the last couple of years. You'll see more of us. You'll see our key directors around rail. So Dr. Stuart Godley, Dr. Mike Walker, a lot of you have come across them in passing. They're going to be front and centre of engaging with you individually and as a group to see what's important and how you can understand what our actual capabilities are to add to that. So with that, I'll wrap up the information giving part of it and look to you for some questions. So, Paul, are you going to just speak to them? Or?
Yeah, Nat. There's been a few questions that have come through. So thanks first and foremost for that presentation. Very informative, and we've got a few good questions that we'll just try and work our way through now. I guess the first one was in relation to the investigators and the sort of training that you might do for them. Can you just give us a bit of detail on that?
Sure. So, in fact, there's been quite a bit of change and activity around this over the last couple of years. Up until a few years ago, the ATSB had its own RTO status. They had accreditation to deliver training. That was allowed to slip. So went through a process of partnering with an RTO a couple of years ago to continue what we called then the Diploma of Transport Safety Investigation. So all investigators do that as well as on-the-job specific training. What we found was that obviously we're a doing organisation, so we're not specialists at training. We don't necessarily have the resource to have to be compliant with RTO status on an ongoing basis. It's quite resource intensive, as I'm sure a number of you recognise. So we put out a request for tender in effect, and we entered into a partnership after looking at a number of universities with RMIT University in Melbourne to conduct a graduate certificate in transport safety investigation. So that's our core qualification. That's open to industry, and in fact, I've seen a couple of people on the participant list here for this webinar who have actually completed that course in the first round last year. Obviously, with COVID, a little bit of a delay. They were hoping for the next course this month, but that's basically the core of all our investigators go through that course to start with. A number of them have further postgraduate qualification as well, but then it's mostly on-the-job training. So that's the core of what we do around that.
Great, thanks, Nat. There's probably a few questions with a similar sort of theme, so I think in the interest of time, I can roll a few of them up together. And that theme is around, I guess, giving industry confidence that investigations can be done in a timely manner and being able to resource and deliver those reports. I guess, do you want to comment on the sorts of things that I guess you're focusing on in that regard?
Yeah. Great question, and a really relevant one, and one we've obviously spoken a lot about over the last couple of years. One of the key focuses we've had in the last couple of years is getting those investigation numbers down, and whilst COVID has been a significant had a significant impact on day-to-day operations of just about everything, the one thing that it has allowed us to do is to reduce that number of active investigations we've got. The key issue we have, and as I sort of said earlier in the presentation, that in terms of the funding, the resourcing that we actually have, it's relatively limited in terms of what we have available to us to investigate. So we can't look at everything. But what we have focused on doing is getting that demand and capacity balance right. So in the first instance, getting that number of investigations down, which means what we do, we're going to do quicker. And that's just simple demand capacity. If you got too much in the plate, the funnel, balls through a funnel, they're going to get clogged up and things will get delayed. So we're going to be focusing a lot more on just investigating a small number of things, but being actively seen out there and gathering that information, probably shorter investigations and then moving to that systemic level, but focusing those investigators on a couple of things at a time, not 10 things at a time. That's probably the key thing that I can sort of guarantee that we are doing now. I think engaging with you more broadly around the confidence of being able to do that, we will engage with you more. We will give you more interim reports so that, you're not waiting right to the end to get things that you knew early in the investigation. Certainly a key focus of the Commission in terms of that timely dissemination of information is so critically important. It may still take 2 or 3 years for a final investigation report, but we want to get information to you earlier. And you can hold me to that, call me on it, that we'll get the information that's relevant to you to start changing things earlier.
Great. Thanks, Nat. Probably the next one, I guess, that we can sort of roll up, there was a bit of a theme about, I guess, being a little bit more systemic. So I guess the question there is, in terms of when you look at those incidents, how do you try and factor in some of those, wider policy and organisational context? I think there's definitely been a theme in some of the questions around wanting to see more of that in terms of the investigations rather than just what happens with the actual parties and the various employees. So you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's absolutely aligned to where I personally want to see things. Like I've said throughout this, and I think I've said it a few times, that where do we add the most value? It is in that systemic. You guys can do the frontline technical elements. You're the ones that know that in your day-to-day. That area, and if I think this, does that still work? Does it show the safety studies slide there? Not sure if it's still up there, but that piece there, that to me is the key at where we can get into that space. I think doing shorter factual investigations will be critical to feeding some of that so that we've got data to feed into this. But it is looking at objectively data, speaking to you about where you think those systemic issues might be as the first source of intelligence, and then using this new safety studies approach, which, by the way, isn't new. It's just bringing it as a priority into where we put our resources. Looking at how we use that, doing a data study around it in relatively short time to say, yes, there is something more broadly that we can investigate there, and then we'll go into that. So that will include people with a rail specialty background, as well as more broadly people with a research and investigative background. So for me, that's the key to us getting into that space. We're certainly not going to be removing ourselves from boots on the ground. If anything, we'll look at how we can have more boots on the ground at the right time to gather the right information. But then what we do with that, we're not going to be spending 18 months coming up with just a technical investigation. But certainly right now we have a number of systemic investigations, and you'll see those come out over the next 6 to 12 months. That do go into the systemic, that are going to be relevant at a national level. We're going to be focusing a lot more on that. And probably the key piece there is engaging with you a lot more around it also.
Okay. Thanks, Nat. Last question, I think, and I think it's an appropriate one and probably a good way to wrap up. Like, there's been a few questions in relation to where you see the rail sector in relation to safety, and I guess I liked your comments before about being able to operate across a number of different modes. So I guess there's a couple of parts. Where do you see the challenges in continually improving management of rail safety, and are there other opportunities to leverage what other modes might be doing well?
Yeah, great question, and quite a common one that I get also, and I answer it with some hesitation sometimes in terms of saying, look at what aviation does, or look at what the nuclear industry does, or otherwise. I think the key thing is everything's got to be contextual. So that first piece, taking into account the context of the environment and history of our industry, but then how do you layer over top of that the learnings from other industries and keep an open mind as to how you might apply it in your own. I suppose in terms of where the safety challenges, if I was to choose a number of themes, I think in the near term, COVID does represent a little bit of a challenge and risk, but also opportunity. But I think the ramp up of capacity that's been ongoing, but once all the interfaces and other modes get going as well, I think we really need to, as an industry, think about that as a change management program, because there's going to be, I think some teething issues as that capacity ramps up. I think it'll ease in, but I think there'll be peaks and troughs around that. I guess a particular bugbear of mine, and I'll take the chance to have the stage now, but in the Glenbrook inquiry, so we're talking 20 years ago, safety critical information is too informal. So communication out there's pockets that do it really well, but there are still so many incidents and events that I see where safety critical information, network control is just way too informal. And I just see it as such a huge opportunity for us to tighten that up, and it is a cultural shift in how we operate. No more, yeah, she'll be right, mate, type stuff. And I know a lot of the railways around Australia aren't doing that anymore, but there are still a hell of a lot of areas that does creep in. So that's probably one area. I think the obvious one broadly is the introduction of automation. There's been a lot of things that I've seen over the last couple of years that are very railway centric, but not just railway centric, Australian centric in terms of the introduction of some of the automated systems globally, and as part of obviously International Rail Safety Council is sort of my key area where I do have a lot of contact with other operators around the world in the railways. Is there's plenty of people that are doing it. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. We are unique in a lot of ways, but there are so many similarities. I think the biggest challenge and the biggest thing that I can see that other industries have done is to take what people have done before, take their lessons, plagiarize what they've got, and use that as the basis. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. And I know there's a lot more international collaboration going on now, but for me, that's probably the biggest thing. So automation, cross industry, looking at how, from the working level all the way through, just talk to people, get people from the other industries to these sort of webinars, listen to the lessons. You'll find you can replace a lot of the lessons with just the rail context in Australia, and you'll see the same mistakes being made all around the place. None of us have enough time on this earth to learn all those lessons, so take the lessons from everyone else, except that there may be a little nugget of information that you can take from them.
Great, and that's a really good way to finish things. So thanks again for your time, Nat. I really enjoyed that. I really appreciated you running through all of that with us. So thanks to everyone who's been on the webinar today, and thanks to everyone for your questions. Most appreciated. I guess have a look at our website. We've got most of the information on upcoming webinars. You can also look back at previous webinars and get some information, including the slides and the video content as well. So for now, goodbye, and we'll see you again shortly.